Hey, it's NPR's Book of the Day. I'm Andrew Limbong. I used to be a booker for NPR. That is, when something happens in the news, I'd find someone to talk about it, call them up, see if they'd be interested, get the schedules aligned, that sort of thing. And when the world got weird or scary, it was natural for me to call up writers, people who might have something to say on the topic beyond the words they've written on the page. Today's interview has me questioning that inclination. It's with the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, whose book Between the World and Me just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. Now, a lot has changed since that book came out. Coates has become something of a literary superstar, the exact type of person I'd call up frantically in my booking days. But in this interview with NPR's Michel Martin, he really questions this idea of a writer as a wise and oracular figure that has something to add to the national discourse besides what they've written. That's ahead.
This message comes from Capital One Commercial Bank. Your business requires commercial banking solutions that prioritize your long-term success. With Capital One, get a full suite of financial products and services tailored to meet your needs today and goals for tomorrow. Learn more at CapitalOne.com/commercial. Member FDIC.
This message comes from Warby Parker. What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost, like free adjustments for life. Find your pair at warbyparker.com or visit one of their hundreds of stores around the country.
10 years ago, Ta-Nehisi Coates published the book Between the World and Me. The memoir, written as a letter to his then 15-year-old son, was a literary phenomenon. 10 years later, as Ta-Nehisi points out in his latest book, The Message, nearly half the country's school children are under state orders to be protected from, quote, critical race theory and other, quote, unquote, divisive concepts. Between the World and Me is now out in paperback on the 10th anniversary of its publication, so we thought this would be a good time to check back in with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he's with us now. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. It's good to talk to you again.
We actually spoke 10 years ago about this book. And
Did we really?
Yes, we did.
Oh my God. Wow.
We actually have the tape of my talking to you 10 years ago. I think we'll drop it in.
Oh, please play a little bit of it. Oh God, that'll be great.
Sure, let's hear it. Why not? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there is now some pressure to be kind of an oracle of race in a way that you did not feel before? Do you want that job?
No. And whenever I've been, very, very careful to tell people what I'm qualified to talk about and what I'm not qualified to talk about. And no one person should be, the spokesperson, for that experience. Well, no one person should be the oracle, be the articulator. Yeah, I still agree with that. I haven't changed on that.
All right.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And so I know that this is kind of a crazy, unknowable question. Is this what you hoped would happen as a result of this book?
Wow, that's a great question. And it's a great question because I'm conflicted. Yes, to some extent. I wanted to be well read, like any writer wants to be well read. I wanted to be well respected as a writer, like any writer wants to be well respected. I remain somewhat flummoxed at the notion of writers as a kind of oracular presence, or the idea that because you wrote a book or two or three that people really enjoy, that means you have some sort of greater thing to say beyond what's actually in the book. Mm-hmm. So like when I think about Between the World and Me, for me, the most riveting part of that book was, not so much what I had to say, but what Dr. Mabel Jones, Prince Jones's mother, had to say,
So let me go back to that, back to why you wrote Between the World and Me. You dedicated your National Book Award and the book to a young man named Prince Jones, whom you knew at Howard University.
Yeah.
Would you just say what happened to him and why it imprinted itself on you so strongly?
Well, Prince was killed by a Prince George's County police officer undercover. And that officer followed my friend Prince from Prince George's County through the District of Columbia into Virginia, where he shot him, a short distance away from the home of the mother of his child and where he was going to see his young child. And it imprinted on me because I watched the dialogue about it in the days afterwards where they speculated, was he a drug dealer? Was he this? Was he that? And Prince was like a born-again Christian. He was the exact opposite of everything. Like this model of who you want, your son to be, publicly, presenting that I think Black parents often fashion. He was like the walking example of it. He was well-spoken. Yes, sir. No, sir. It's kind of Southern, yes, ma'am. No, ma'am thing he would have. Very gentlemanly. I mean, at Howard, he pledged Gentleman of Drew. And like he got killed by a police officer. I mean, it was just the most, and I spent 15 years weighing how that happened and like why the dialogue around him was so different than the person that I knew. And that was the seed of Between the World and Me all those years before.
Why do you think Between the World and Me had the impact that it did? Do you have a sense 10 years later of what it captured in the moment that captured the public attention?
I think there are things that are in your control and things that are not in your control. The thing that was in my control, I should say our control, because I'm about to talk about my wonderful editor, Chris Jackson, was to, like, we had this test, and the test was, could a 14-year-old kid who liked reading read the book? And then the thing that is outside of your control, and that is just where the country is or where the audience is at that particular moment. The Mother Emanuel massacre had happened that summer. Mm-hmm. And actually the book was not supposed to come out until I think end of September, August. And they moved it up after the massacre because I think people were just searching, for answers as to like how this, had happened.
Mm-hmm. So let me now quote from your latest book, The Message, which has also caused quite a stir. It may seem strange that a fight that began in the streets has now moved to the library, that a counter-revolution in defense of brutal policing has now transformed itself into a war over scholarship and art. But in the months after George Floyd's murder, books by Black authors on race and racism shot to the top of the bestseller list and most borrowed lists. Black bookstores saw their sales skyrocket. The cause for the spike was, in the main, people who had been exposed to the image of George Floyd being murdered, who suddenly began to suspect that they had not been taught the entire truth about justice, history, policing, racism, and any number of other related subjects. Here your book was so celebrated 10 years ago, and then 10 years later, people are trying to ban it or at least make it harder to access. And I just wonder what you make of that.
Probably go hand in hand. I mean, one of the things that, and I went and researched this when I was working on The Message. It's like, Toni Morrison faced bans for like the vast majority of her literary career. Certainly, the greatest novelist of the latter half of the 20th, early 21st century. People put her, in that sort of ranks. And yet she consistently faced bans in a way that I would point out, other writers who might contend for that same title did not in the same degree that she did.
So what kind of conversations are you having, or do you have a sense of what kinds of conversations you're going to have now? Or is the lack of conversation a statement in itself?
About Between the World and Me?
Yeah, about Between the World and Me.
It's hard to talk about it. I mean, even now, like, it's weird to talk about the book because it's like, I feel like, again, I talk about this in The Message about how, these books are like kids and they go on and they have their lives. It's like, I really, really believe that once you publish the book, it really doesn't belong to you anymore. It's not yours,
Ta-Nehisi Coates is the author of Between the World and Me, which is celebrating a decade in print, and it's available in paperback now. Ta-Nehisi Coates, thanks so much for talking to us once again.
Thank you, Michelle.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Delta, committed to the communities where their employees live, work, and serve. Delta First Officer Pilot Monique Grayson shares why she believes in the value of giving back.
Volunteering helps because it gives you an opportunity to see a different perspective. There's so much in the world that we'll miss. But when you take a moment to spend time with somebody else, to pour into somebody else, your perspective changes. You start to see the importance of being the change you want to see in the world. It helps people reach their goals when you have someone showing that they care. And when people feel cared for, they perform differently. Their confidence changes. This person is supporting me. And then not only that, it holds them accountable too. Because if the person that's supporting you is in a position where you want to be at, let me go ahead and put my best foot forward. At least that's how I would think about it.
Delta, committed to giving back for 100 years.